Warm regards to everyone. I am Rosie Giri and welcome to the weekly talk series of Nepallive Today, where we talk on the contemporary issues with a different personality. Today, to join these conversations, we have a young, vibrant and a dynamic CA who is holding a positions of Deputy CEO at Nabil Bank. Welcome to the talk series, sir.
Thank you, Rosie.
How have you been?
Bank is doing good.
Bank is doing good? Yeah. What is the current situation?
So banks, if you ask about the bank's current situation, is brand position wise, the balance sheet size wise or profitability wise, last year as well we are awarded as the highest taxpayer bank. So banks is doing good if we compare with other competitive banks, but this economic situation and other things are gradually improving.
Really, we are hopeful for that too. And now I'd like to begin with the current actuals and the real scenarios. So the business persons and the investors are into the protest. I think you're quite known about the fact, and they are actually into the protest, saying that banks are actually this increase in higher interest rates and the shortage of liquidity is creating quite a problem for them to continue their business. How do you see their protest?
Yeah, we are quite aware about the protest, and in some provinces and some branches they have submitted their letter as well. But the situation is, I would like to evaluate in two scenarios. So one part, the liquidity situation. If you ask about the liquidity situation, earlier many people says this is the liquidity crisis, this and that, but at that time there is a shortage of loanable fund only, right? So there was a liquidity situation. Bank were able to pay their deposit or return the deposit at maturity or on demand, if that is a current account or saving account deposit. So liquidity situation was adequate to make repayment of the bank, but loanable fund was short. So banks were not able to lend money as per the requirement of the borrower. That was the situation. And now the situation has been totally changed. If you just compare last year, CD ratio, Rashtra Bank has prescribed CD ratio of 90% cap. Last year, almost all the time, CD ratio remained above 90%. And this year situation is gradually improving, and if you just consider that current CD ratio situation, it's 86.15%. That means we have more than this 5,200 billion rupees of deposit, and we can lend 90% of that deposit. So if we consider that 86.15% of CD ratio, so there is a lending room of about 200 billion rupees in a market. So as of now, if banks would like to go up to their ceiling, bank can lend up to 200 billion rupees amount. So if you just convert that amount and divide into the banks, at least 10 to 15 billion rupees per bank is the capacity of lending. So there is liquidity situation has been substantially improved. So that liquidity crisis is almost over, I say. But the loan demand is very less. And the next part, I fully agree that interest rate is raising each day, and that is creating problem for entrepreneurs, business persons. That is a valid comment as of now as well, because if you go to any bank, even if you come to the Nabil Bank, who is the bank who can provide loan at the cheapest rate, we can't offer anything less than 13.5 or 14%, considering that risk profile of the borrower. So this is the situation, and yes, business persons and entrepreneurs are facing difficulties, not only because of the increasing interest rate, inflation is increased, and another part, market demand is substantially decreased. So there is decrease in turnover. So when their turnover decreases, their profitability and profit margin has been decreased, and they are facing additional burden because of the increased interest rate. And we need to understand the mechanism of interest rate raise as well, because if you just consider as banks are increasing interest rate, of course increasing interest rate is not in the benefit of the bank as well, because if we raise the interest rate, if a business person can't sustain, then ultimately they will convert it into non-performing loans. Ultimately that will create a big problem for the banking industry and the bank itself. So banks never favor that increasing interest rate which are not sustainable for the borrower. But we need to understand that earlier bank used to revise interest rate in almost all loans, all borrowers, right? So sometimes bank used to lend at less rate than this FD rates. But now the situation is changed. Rashtra Bank is asking banks to strictly comply with that 15 number directive, which says you can't change premium rate on the loan, right? So your base rate increases, then you can increase the interest rate. Your base rate decrease, then you have to decrease. You can't change interest rates premium to the borrower before renewal and review, right? So then whatever existing portfolio, we can't change interest rate, and if somebody comes to us for new loan or that is under this review or renewal, then we need to charge it. It is recovering our cost, and current rate of deposit is, if you just consider, it's 11% plus in a FD, and this is the remittance FD, it's 12% plus. So, and if we just collect deposit of 1 crore rupees, we can't lend 1 crore rupees to the borrower, because we have to maintain 20% liquidity ratio. That means if we collect deposit of 1 crore rupees, we have to deduct CRR ratio, we have to maintain SLR ratio and liquidity ratio. So 80 lakh we can lend to the borrowers, and we have to recover that 12% cost or the 11% cost out of that 80 lakh rupees which is paid for the 1 crore rupees. That's why that any customers or any borrowers, any entrepreneurs, business persons comes to the bank are charging higher interest rate either on review renewal and in new loan. So that is the case. Ultimately they are making high cry of this.
Even after knowing this mechanism of the interest rate growth, many business community members are accusing that banks are actually extorting money from them by increasing higher interest rate in this difficult economic times which the whole nation is facing. Why banks are resorted to increasing interest rate after maintaining this stability in a long time?
Basically, we need to understand the basic economics of pricing. Right? So interest rate is the price of the cost of deposit, right? So simple economics, what economics says, when there is shortage of supply and there is high demand, that price goes up, right? So if there is less demand and excess supply, automatically that price goes down. So what is the situation now? So in between last year, whole year, there was a shortage of resources, there was pressure on resources, so deposit shortage was there. That's why deposit cost goes higher and higher. And even Rashtra Bank wants to increase interest rate sometimes, and many people says yes, because if interest rate increases, that helps three angles. One, that discourages additional extra consumption. So ultimately that help us to anchor our inflation rate. Otherwise inflation would have been very higher than whatever it is today. And next part, the consumption is reduced, that means our import is reduced, and ultimately that help us to maintain our BOP situation and other things in order. And third things, with the increased interest rate, so there is less demand of loan in a market, and gradually deposit is increasing. So at least I said there is a loanable fund, and banks are out of that liquidity crisis, as you say. So with that raised interest rate, there are some positive outcome as well. So we are focusing only one side, and if I ask with the business person, only interest rate is your problem? No, that is not the problem, because ask with every business person, their turnover has been substantially decreased, their margin has been substantially decreased, right? So interest rate is one part. We are transparent, we publish financial all the time, we publish interest rate, that is transparent. That's why people used to make high cry on this. Otherwise, what is the margin of the banks and what is the margin of the business? You can see, you can evaluate. Banks were paying, even in my case, this bank was paying 100%, 80%, 70%, 50%, 60% dividend. What's the dividend payout ratio now? How much banks are earning now? Banks earning, in many banks, they are declaring dividend, and Nabil Bank is the highest dividend declaring bank, and the 30%, that is because of that merger and acquisition. Otherwise, it would have been only 12.5% at max. This bank was paying 100% dividend sometimes, and now the same bank is hardly being able to pay even 13%, and that remaining amount is the share, because of the share swap ratio, and many banks are not being able to pay more than 10-12%. So where is the margin?
Okay.
It's the cost of transparency. We are transparent, that's why people accuse us. We are transparent, that's why people blame us. So it's not a blaming game. This is the tough time, I agree on that. This time it's not a time to blame one another, right? So we have to complement, supplement and understand business of other person. We have to support regulators move, we have to coordinate with the government, we need to support business person as well, and we should not blame bankers as well. So this is the tough time. At tough time, we all stakeholders, government, regulators, bankers and the business person has to be on the same ground. We need to understand problems of one another and we need to complement, supplement, support one another. That will solve the problem. Accusing and blaming one party to other, that will not help. And that is not the real scenario as well.
I hope the cooperations will lead to the better results in
the
future.
Yeah.
So another question is, why is this acute shortage of investment grade liquidity continues despite a sharp decline in demand for loans and hike in deposit interest rate?
No, I already said because of that decline in lending demand and increasing interest rate, liquidity situation has been substantially improved. As I already said, if you just compare last year's situation and now, I said last year, whole year that liquidity situation was tight. All the banks were running above 90% of CD ratio. I said the average CD ratio of the banking sector is 86.15%. So there is gap and room of 3.85%. That means 200 billion extra loanable fund available in the market, right? So that has been substantially improved, I say.
Yeah. And another thing is, yes, we have witnessed the shortage of liquidity at different times, over the last couple of years also. But what is the situations now compared to the shortages before? Yeah,
it's different. We face liquidity crisis earlier as well, but at that time what happened, Nepal Rashtra Bank increased that capital of banks 4 times. Bank and financial institutions capital raised by 4 times, and when their capital raised in that way, all the banks tried to take the additional growth considering their capital adequacy and all, right? So then the demand of resources was there, and that was not created because of other reason, but that was because of the additional extra appetite of the banking sector's capital adequacy, right? But the current situation is something different because our deposit growth is not so high. Last year we faced so much problem. BOP deficit was substantially increasing. Government banned some imports. Even Rashtra Bank restricted and discouraged certain imports because it's not only because of this Nepalese contest, but if you just compare that oil price, it increases almost 5 times and that ultimately triggered inflation and all. If you just compare in US history, in a 40 years time, US faced that highest inflation rate, which is more than 8.5% around, right? And in India as well, that RBI rate they try to maintain it at a certain rate. That also triggered and increased to the next level. And because of that Ukraine and this Russia war, so almost price level and everything disorder across the world, and that is the impact in Nepal contest as well. And because of that increased import, immediately after that COVID, our settlement of that remittance money which were there, they just used hundi and all, and that remittance also decreased, right? So our outgoing people or the migrant worker, number of migrant workers substantially increased, but our volume of remittance were decreased earlier. So because of this situation and scenario, our liquidity situation was different than previously we faced that liquidity situation. But now everything is in order. If you just compare, so BOP situation is almost stable and being comfortable than before, right? So inflation is also under control, and liquidity situation, as I already said, that is now we have at least loanable fund, and I'm hopeful that election are over and this result is there. If new government come with some very winning plan programs and something to direct this economy in a next direction, so that will create additional hope to business persons and this economic sector, and will ultimately help to decrease the interest rate. And I am very much hopeful, so I'm expecting some good things to happen and this composition of the government will be better. We'll get that very good finance minister who can at least understand the business and this economy of the country. With that support, within 2 to 3 months' time, I would like to see a very comfortable position in the economy.
Wonderful. At the same time, in your own opinion, how long do you think that the financial system has to face the shortage of investable funds?
No, again I say investable fund, now we are not facing shortage of investable fund, the cost of fund is the problem now. That shortage of investable fund is already over, I say. Right now the situation is different. We have investable fund. The cost of this lending is very high, which is discouraging business persons and the entrepreneurs. So I expect some good things happen, some good policies of the government will be announced, and with the regulators' assistance and all, gradually that interest rate will goes down, and as per current mechanism, so bank and financial institutions can't decrease interest rate by 10% in one announcement. So I expect to decrease this interest rate by 10%. If that interest rate will decrease by 10%, at least that 27-28% of total deposit portfolio, which is about 1,500 billion deposits rates, will be immediately decrease, and which will ultimately reduce the cost of deposit and ultimately decrease that base rate of banks, and business persons will get some relief out of it.
So the current problem which we are discussing right now, that the many people say that this is also because of the policies of the central bank. What's your take on this?
I have both part on this. So generally, if doctors prescribe some medicines and some injections, generally the patient never like that, right? But this is the good health for the patient. So we need to take things positively. Yes, there are some side effects of that decision taken by Nepal Rashtra Bank, right? People are making issue out of this working capital financing guidelines issued by Rashtra Bank. They are making issue out of that Rashtra Bank's motives to increase the interest rate. But we have to look from the both angles, not only from that my angle only, because this national economy is the top priority, then my business income and loss is the second priority. If we think in that way, Nepal Rashtra Bank's move to increase interest rate to maintain that BOP situation is the comfortable situation, to maintain liquidity situation, and to regulate working capital financing and all. Yes, as a regulator, I have to say that that move is for long-term good health of the financial sector, but yes, sometimes it has immediate negative impact on the business persons and their cost. That's why they are making high cry, but we have to take in totality and long-term impact. If you see the long-term impact and all, so of course regulators are taking a good move.
In your own opinion, as you are taking the chair of executive levels, what do you think needs to be done to ease this situation?
No, situation has been already eased out, and this liquidity situation good. Now we have to make a plan to reduce interest rate, and the cost of deposit has to be reduced. That benefit has to be passed on to entrepreneurs and the business persons. When that vehicle is running at this 5-number gear and with a speed of 100 and 110 km per hour, and if you just switch the brake immediately, there may be accident. So regulators has to take a move gradually and step by step, and sometimes some relaxation has to be provided to maintain that pace as well. And I suggest Rashtra Bank to relax some mechanism of interest rate related directive, so that we can reduce that cost of saving deposits substantially, and even we can reduce 20% or 15%, whatever we want, 1%, 2% interest rate substantially immediately. That will ultimately ease out and help out the situation to reduce the cost of deposit and cost of fund, which ultimately pass on to the business person. But business person has to be responsible adequately, right? So how much transparent they are, how much they book that revenue in this books of account, how much tax they pay, right? So that has to be also taken care of. So government also has to encourage persons who pays tax, who are transparent and who contribute to the nation. right, rather than those person who maintain 2 and 3 or 4 types of books who are not transparent, and they should not listen to them. And import has also to be booked in this actual pricing. Under invoicing is there, so many things has to be addressed from the government side, from the regulator side, and even bankers and the business person has to be disciplined. So with all these moves at one place, situation will be immediately improved.
Let's hope that this economic pace of the country go in the good directions with a good pace. And out of nowhere, I would like to ask a very personal questions. How is life as a banker?
Yeah, life as a banker, I'm always enjoying, right? So my personal thing as well. So when I don't enjoy, I don't come to office, right? I resign in 2-3 organization and all. So I'm happily coming to the office. That means I'm enjoying my institution, I'm enjoying my job. And somebody says that banking job is tough and very hardworking, I don't have any issue and problem to give more time and hard work. So I'm enjoying banking profession and job very, very well.
Yes, we have almost come to the end of today's conversations. Any advice you would like to give to the young visionaries who want to settle their career in bank?
Yeah, so basically I would like to say to the youngsters who want to join the bank, so situation is different. It's not like before when we joined the bank. And now this youngsters have this gap in this competencies and their career dream. So they need to maintain their skills, attitudes along with the knowledge, right? These young graduates, they are better in this knowledge level, but knowledge is not adequate, right?
Exactly.
So you have to maintain your positive attitude in personal level, relationship management skill, communication management skills, and with this positive attitude, if they join, they can do better in this banking career. And if they pursue the career just as things to continue just to maintain their family expenses and all, they will not make a progress more. They have to take it banking as a passion, right? So they have to put more effort, they have to be more flexible, the relationship management skill has to be improved, communication skill has to be improved, and if they will be ready available for the hard working with this all this efficiency, they can excel. And yes, I fully agree that if we just compare our time and today's time, so youngsters are very sharp, they are very smart in this technological changes and all. So everywhere technology is changing and they can adopt it very well, but they have to be equipped with this skills and better attitude along with the knowledge.
Thank you for your time, insights and conversations. I would like to best wishes for your future journey, and yes, thank you again.
Thank you, Rosie.